For as long as entertainment has been around, it's been innovating to suit our tastes and our newfound capabilities. Color television might have once seemed as though an exciting new novelty, but we're far removed from those days in the age of a billion streaming services, and even now we're still marching on through the tides of time, amassing entire new platforms and methods of sharing content with each other. And perhaps no method of entertainment demonstrates this better than the modern landscape of live streaming. Usually, but not always, focused on playing video games in front of a large audience, streaming has become nearly ubiquitous with online entertainment. Have a fun and interesting game to show an audience? Have a likable, engaging personality? Have a decent setup and an internet connection? Well then you too can sit in front of OBS Studio, screen share Half-Life, and become an internet sensation. But streaming itself has been around for a while now, and innovations in its domain were bound to come along sooner or later. Audience feedback and involvement in a streamer's entertainment is one of the driving forces behind streaming entertainment, after all. Participation in live chat, having your donation messages read, participating in having incentives reached through specific donation goals, things like that. They're very good ways to get an audience involved with their favorite entertainment personalities, and really feel involved in a community sense. But what if that audience could be even more involved? What if they could, in part, control the action? Well, there's one streamer, like several before, who dared to ask this question. But unlike those before, he decided to ask it in a truly unconventional way. And what resulted, while one of the funniest and most entertaining streams I've ever had the pleasure of sitting through, is also ripe for the kind of existential horror that I think it might not have even been aware that it was filled to the brim with. This is my much too serious examination of the Jerma Dollhouse, a serial comedic live-action stream which has captured the minds of thousands, and whether intentionally or otherwise, the true essence of fear that defines our growing entertainment landscape. Part 1. Novelty Entertainment. Let's take a step back. Let's talk about audience participation in streams for a second. The first extremely notable example I can think of when it comes to letting an audience dictate much of the action in streaming comes back to a series of streams rather affectionately referred to as Twitch Plays Pokemon. The premise is, as the title suggests, rather simple. A copy of Pokemon streaming over the service Twitch would be shown to a live audience of thousands of people, and certain actions in the game, like moving left, right, up or down, or pressing any of the other buttons, would be mapped to certain chat messages. This meant that whenever somebody in the chat typed a specific command, the game, which was hooked to those commands in the chat, would detect it and act accordingly. The goal was basically to see if the chat could cooperate, despite thousands all trying to do the same thing at one time, to complete the game. Of course, this predictably exploded into a chaotic mess of many people trying to actually complete the game, others going full anarchy and trying to ruin things as often as possible, and others still just trying to take bizarre detours. It was the perfect storm, and of course, since it was so easily accessible to a potential new audience member, only requiring them to join the chat to get right in on the action, it proved extremely successful. One of the key draws of live streaming, though, is arguably the personalities involved, though, right? Watching your favorite streamer, a person whose personality, thoughts, and feelings you enjoy, a person who you'd like to see play a specific game and offer their color commentary, reactions, etc. Twitch Plays Pokemon was a delightful novelty for what it was, but it did lack that specific element that many people come to streaming for. A personality. For all intents and purposes, it was basically just an emulator on a streaming window for people to interact with public gallery style. There was nobody actually performing the actions that chat requested on the other end. It was pure technology. What if you could actually do something like this with a person, though? Would it even be possible? How would you go about it? What format would it even take? Somebody would come along to answer that question. Somebody who we now have to discuss. Somebody named Jerma985. Jerma985 is, in reality, a man by the name of Jeremy Harrington, a YouTube commentator and gamer residing in Las Vegas, Nevada. The beginning of his channel was defined by his popular video commentaries of the multiplayer smash hit from Valve, Team Fortress 2. Born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts, Jeremy went to college and majored in communications, minoring in art. He worked various jobs over the years, a call center, filming weddings, and even as a substitute teacher for middle school. Although apparently most of these were jokes, actually very little is known about Jerma's personal life. By his own admission, he's made so many jokes about it for the sake of protecting his identity that the truth often gets lost in between the fabrications. Most real-life information about him is really only discernible through occasional anecdotes he tells on streams, but even these are questionable at best. Jeremy streams weekly on Twitch, with highlights of his streams often uploaded to his channel Second Jerma on YouTube. His content mostly consists of raw gameplay with occasional facecam, and his own commentary over mic. His bizarre mannerisms and energetic sense of humor have captured many a viewer's attention, and endeared him to them despite their insistence on building elaborate lore around him and often declaring him a psychopath. During one of Jerma's streams one day, though, he said something rather prophetic.
You know, I thought of a stream a while back. Actually, this is during the House Flipper streams. I was thinking about, would it be funny if I were to try to actually, like, redecorate in, like, a house in real life? Just an open floor with paint and stuff. Just build, like, 3 or 4 artificial rooms. And then decorate them. And take you through it. It would take a lot of prep, but I don't think it would be too... All I would need to do is just put up, like, a wood, and then just have, like, some drywall. Just make, like, a fake room in, like, a studio. Be on studio, and have, like, 3 small rooms made that can have, like, couches and furniture and stuff in them. Dollhouse. The Jerma Dollhouse. Have multiple floors where it's just weird and the camera zooms out. I like walk up the stairs. I get into the bed. Ooh, this is comfy. Just have it be real life Sims. Imagine if I made a fucking dollhouse cut in half sort of like set. And you guys just played The Sims, but it was just me in a house. That would be really, really creepy.
And fast forwarding 2 years, this very idea was being put into production. With the assistance and financial support of Twitch, Coinbase, and an entire crew of dedicated talent working hard to make it happen, the Jerma 985 Dollhouse was born. Part 2. The Jerma 985 Dollhouse is a potent metaphor for the hell of parasociality. I swear I'm going somewhere with this. The premise was admittedly rather simple, and was based around the popular sandbox simulation game series, The Sims, wherein players create virtual avatars, place them in houses, help stabilize their moods, satisfy their desires, and build a life for them, composed of jobs, friends, family, and belongings. Viewers would watch Jerma on a set of elaborate fake rooms on a soundstage, replicating a sort of truncated daily life within the confines of the false dollhouse, and vote on his actions to proceed the day along. They could do rather routine things like picking his outfit at the start of each session, satiate Jerma's meters, feeding him to satisfy his hunger, sending him to the bathroom to relieve his bladder, and so on. But in addition, they could also decide on tasks for him, like jogging, working out, dancing, or catching butterflies. They could even dictate his responses in various social situations, like being rude, flirty, or confrontational. At the end of daily intervals, when Jerma sleeps, the chat is also given the opportunity to buy different items for his house, deciding where in whichever room they'd like to place them. Within the first hour, things already start to become disastrous. Jerma is made to call a plumber to fix his toilet, then commanded to shower while she's still in the room. He passes out on the floor, rests on a dirty mattress in the middle of his kitchen, and is harassed by clowns who appear to torment him when his fun meter has gotten too low. He's exhausted to the point of passing out in his yard, and chat, of course, does not operate under his best interests, despite his repeated insistence on doing so. They're doing what's funny, and that's basically going to remain their driving principle over the course of the next 3 sessions that the stream takes place over. He's visited by who he thinks is his uncle's ghost, and they send the Grim Reaper after him. Jerma gets a pool, they let him drown in it by taking away the ladder. He's about to be taken by death, they have him woo-hoo with him to convince him not to. Every choice along the way, it seems, with the exception of occasionally relenting to the needs of his meters, is made with the express purpose of frustrating or torturing Jerma in some comedic fashion. And this leads to things often getting suitably over the top, such as when, after being forced to call the Grim Reaper on his uncle, which visibly traumatizes him, Jerma is visited by an elderly neighbor who directly imposes on him for hours, all while the chat votes to make him flirt with her. Day by day, he simulates the ordinary minutiae of interacting with neighbors, seeking a fitness instructor, painting walls, injuring himself, deciding what to eat. Almost none of these things turn out well for him, though, of course. If it went well all the time, it wouldn't be nearly theatrical enough to be entertaining. The chat, in all its bloodlust, continues to demand what will produce the funniest outcomes of these scenarios, most often at Jerma's extreme expense. It's at this point that I started to notice something being touched on by these streams that I'm pretty sure wasn't intentional, but I just couldn't help but continue thinking about all throughout. The fact that this is the perfect, horrific mirror to the way we often interact with entertainers, especially in the internet age, in a parasocial sense. Now, let me be clear, I'm not trying to philosophize like I'm the only person to have ever thought of this. Parasocial relationships are something we've only become more and more aware of over the last couple of years, particularly with how isolated we've been, and think pieces revolving around them are aplenty. I just think it's funny, right? The premise of a streamer literally streaming a twisted facsimile of real life for an audience of thousands, determining his actions and even how he's allowed to outwardly interact with the world for the purposes of entertainment. Jerma is, of course, just doing a bit here. He's not legitimately suffering. But it was almost surreal watching him bounce between the comedic absurdity of situation after situation mounting on top of him, watching him pantomime sobbing, and then being sat in front of a computer to pretend to stream while on a stream of himself and pretend to be happy in front of an audience as his simulated life crumbles around him. There's just something that's a little bit sobering about that, as funny as it is within its own silly context, right? Like, just insofar as it reminds us of how hyper-marketed we ourselves often feel compelled to be online.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Jerma here. We're going to be playing some Call of Duty.
I mean, how often do you see people casually commenting on a content creator's work, saying such informal things to them like they were buddies sharing a laugh when they've never met before? This is all, I feel, brilliantly captured through the distorted lens of the Jerma Dollhouse, accentuating the absurd heights of how entertainment often does necessitate exaggerating our everyday lives into something theatrical and absurd. Keep in mind, after all, that this stream that hundreds of thousands of people tuned into and participated in is more or less just a stage reenactment of just some guy's daily life, albeit with much more ridiculous scenarios available to scour for their entertainment value. This isn't even a stream of a video game. Jerma himself has become the fixture of his own self-acted video game, but in person, for the purpose of making all of this work. He himself becomes a vessel for acting out the comedy the audience wishes to see, whether that's interacting with a made-for-hire or being tormented in his nightmares by people laughing at him for soiling himself and then being forced to stream again during it. You see what I mean? With personalities becoming more of an important fixture of streaming and even just content creation in general, especially on Twitch and YouTube, it's instrumental to sort of make a brand out of yourself. Your own self-image becomes distorted through the view of thousands of other people who all have a perception and opinion of you, your actions, your style of humor. Every little detail is magnified an infinite number of times over, all to be squeezed dry for any grain of entertainment value it contains. And please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying something like this is fundamentally bad. In many cases, it's not, and I find the Jerma Dollhouse entertaining as hell for these very reasons. But it does just bring to mind where we're at, broadly speaking, right? That a viable option for captivating this large of an audience wouldn't even be to play a popular fantasy game that depicts such fantastical things we could only dare dream of, but a guy in a fake front lawn getting attacked by a guy in a bear costume, painting his walls and discovering a safe, and getting evicted from his own house. There's a certain perfect level of madness that's captured here that I think is indicative of how we deem it necessary to get by in these spaces anymore, honestly. There's literally a part of the stream where Jerma is commanded to watch TV and turns it on only to be met with the channel of someone he's just met earlier in the week lambasting him and describing how much he sucks. It's absurd in a way that meshes so well with the fears I've been describing here that it's borderline hysterical. I genuinely couldn't stop laughing when I first saw it while thinking about all this, because, like, God, what a perfectly distorted reflection of all these anxieties, right? What if everyone had a megaphone to scrutinize every aspect of you? Back in the day, the extent of parasocial relationships was best captured by the craze of celebrities, that, to its credit, does still continue to this day. People clinging on to these acclaimed stars like people they desperately wanted to know but often never could, despite their best and creepiest efforts. Now, though, celebrities and e-celebrities alike are more accessible than ever. Join their Patreon, get in their Discord chat, watch their live streams. And it loops around, too, because just as the audience is allowed to getting closer to their favorite entertainers, so too are those entertainers expected to adjust to those expectations. Mundane, intimate details about their lives that would normally remain reserved for friends or family become just a regular part of the social media feed for them to share and become relatable content. With the veneer of Hollywood showmanship chipping away after years of collective disenchantment with the generally perceived mainstream, people turn to more grounded, intimate-seeming creators who seem real. Ironically, it's this genuine quality, this real quality, that now becomes the new goal of the entertainer in the modern era. To be as effective as possible at mimicking sincerity. Everybody's looking for a friend beyond the screen, and they're looking for it from people who they, again, will likely never even meet. Who is Jerma, really? I mean, we still barely know anything about the guy. I couldn't even tell you if the name I read out for him at the start of this video was real or just something he made up. But I spent nearly 8 hours watching him pace a fake house and do random things for my own amusement, and so did thousands of others. Why? What about our collective human experiences draws us to something like this, magnifies it like this? There's a real horror in being known when it comes to the scale of media like this, and yet it only keeps escalating because we all keep making and feeding it. It's a never-ending cycle. Often this disconnect between our true life experiences and our marketable, brand-friendly selves comes at the detriment of our own health, too. I mean, I don't need to point out again how many examples there are across these streams of Jerma's many different bars being extremely low and them being forced to do something that will almost certainly make them worse just because it would be funny. I could point out how deeply ironic and almost terrifyingly funny it is that multiple of those examples involve sending an exhausted and distressed Jerma with near-empty bars to work, though. Not to get all we live in a society about this, but man, I genuinely felt a little bad for him at times like that, even though I know all of this is just goofs for show. It's just a sentiment that I related to enough to actually feel some sense of empathy for. The chaotic menagerie of circumstances that make up the many hours of this stream just compound, and even still through all of this nonsense, Jerma, the in-character version of Jerma that is, has absolutely no control over what's happening. He literally gets robbed and his house burns down, and the chat will drown him in a pool 5 minutes later. In an abstract way, it actually kind of reminds me of the very algorithms that drive sites like these to begin with. I mean, think about it, right? You can continue to draw in an audience at the expense of all your time, energy, and even mental wellness, and still be rewarded with peanuts unless you keep at it. If you're sane enough to value your own health more highly than that, your traction, your livelihood, all of it can be ripped away at the whim of advertisers who would prefer someone more willing to crunch themselves to death because they're making more content than you. More entertainment to feed into the mindless grinder, quality notwithstanding, because what makes them more money? Somebody who values themselves and their own work enough to stay healthy, or somebody so pressured, so strained by the constant demand of the grind that they'll literally destroy themselves making somebody else more money just to survive. This is, I feel, best and most hilariously reflected towards the end of the stream, when Jerma is evicted from his house and temporarily replaced with Ludwig, who has been portraying a fan-favorite character in the stream thus far. You'd think that the audience would treat him nicer than Jerma, right? Nope. In fact, as soon as he gets into Jerma's position, they exhaust him to the same comedically cruel extent that they did Jerma himself. It's like the curse of the spotlight demands somebody suffer for the camera, and since Jerma's off camera, he just happens to be lucky enough to escape it. But even then, he was still evicted to escape it, wasn't he? Contrast that with a real-life parallel situation, say, somebody unable to continue their heavily intensive work on YouTube content because of dire health issues and then losing their main source of income. yeah, that can get pretty dark to think about, can't it? I hate to seem like I'm getting too personal in my videos to the point of being awkward, but I've felt this sort of frustration firsthand, and it was sort of cathartic to feel like this whole thing reflected the whole topic back to me, funhouse mirror style. Like, yeah, people get it. I've been making videos for a couple of years now, and I've seen some pretty substantial growth since then, but after making one of my most successful videos last year, around Halloween time, my computer faced some serious issues, which prevented me from making more videos until around January of this year. And that period of inactivity killed my momentum. All of the exponential growth I was seeing on the channel faded away, and for months and months I've struggled trying to put stuff together that I care about, while seeing YouTube simply not give it the time of day, convinced that a short wane of numbers meant that I was entirely irrelevant again. Not pumping out content, not worth the ad space, replaceable. It's a harrowing thing to find your niche and feel forced out of it just because you're not killing yourself to get it done. I mean, even when I am active, it's not like it's always easy to dedicate so much time to a video, right? The isolation of lockdowns and the depression that comes with poorer performance, I'm sure you can only imagine adds to that feeling of hopelessness. And that's definitely not just a me thing. So in most cases, you simply have to push on, regardless of how empty and listless you feel, determined to just push something out there for its own sake, if only because the idea of crashing back into cold irrelevance means it will only be that much harder to skate by and make any more revenue with what you love to do later. You kind of start to forget that you even loved doing this in the first place. I appreciate you guys. I don't know basically any of you. Please don't misread the depth of that statement. I'm just very appreciative. But I'm not going to call you my family or any other weird, overly intimate crap like that. But in addition to being extremely grateful towards you, I'm also kind of terrified of you. Always wondering if what I have to say will be something you enjoy or take some interest in, or whether it will be dry, dull, and hackneyed. As I write these words, I'm already going over in my head about how miserably stupid this will all seem if you don't buy into the premise of this video on its face, that a silly stream series like the Jerma Dollhouse even provoked these introspections in me in the first place. If it doesn't land, what then? It just seems like the inane ramblings of someone taking something ultimately pretty goofy far too seriously, doesn't it? Or maybe that's just me projecting my fear outward onto you. It's hard to really tell sometimes when this is the job that you're doing. I worry about smaller details than that, too. I often worry about making my room look nice when it's on camera. I worry about how I look on camera. I worry about how my voice sounds when I record it. And as much as I loathe to admit, I worry about everything that people in my comments say about me. Why lie about it, right? It's easy to say that nothing gets to you, but it's much harder to actually mean it. It's interesting, then, that wondering what kind of input people I don't know would have over my actions, my work, or my life would even mean to me divorced from the modern context of how entertainment is now. If we all weren't marketing ourselves to each other through the veneer of our own virtual dollhouses, how would we see each other? Would we even care what the other did or had to say? Would any of us watch Jerma walk around a set of rooms for 8 hours? Maybe some of us would, but it's hard to imagine that near as many would bother. If I didn't already feel like I had some degree of comedic familiarity with and an attachment via entertainment to Jerma as a streamer, then I would probably have never sat through all of that. And to be clear, I'm glad I did. It was very funny and fun, but its makeup just inevitably serves as the perfect time capsule of how we've gotten here. Seeking the grounded and the sincere is a noble desire, and it's in crafting an expedient, massive substitute for it that we've been incentivized to even do things like this. Polls, chats, incentives, meets, and dollhouses. What do you figure it's like to live in a landscape like this when it's all you've ever known, too? I mean, I was born in the 90s, so obviously I know an internet that predates all of this, and have watched it grow into what it is now. But what about the kids who are entrenched in all of this from day one? That must be a uniquely disorienting experience, right? I'd like to actually call attention on that note to something said in an interview by musician and comedian Bo Burnham about this very topic when he was discussing his film 8th Grade. During his research, Burnham sought out teens, much like his younger self, who were telling their stories online, but who, unlike himself, were not racking up millions of views. He searched videos by upload day rather than view counts. He wanted to see the kids who typically get ignored. I remember just watching these clips and thinking, if this was a performance, this would be incredible. What got me was that image of a kid looking into a camera, addressing an audience who she knows is probably not there. Yet, we're there, watching the movie. Now we're all acting like celebrities and commodifying ourselves. Kids act like their own publicists. They curate their f***ing brands. As someone who had a little bit of a little taste of that as a D-list comedian celebrity, it's the worst way to live your life. A sort of numbness and slight loneliness and haziness. Is it like a dissociative disorder? I feel like it's made everyone have a sense that my life is not real. My friends aren't real. It's hard to describe in words. All of my fears and all of my worries I have because I'm addicted to the internet. It has made me worse. Somehow we're convinced that the story of the internet are these loud, brash, Jake Paul in a Japanese suicide forest kids or whatever, and it's not. The majority of the people on the internet are people expressing themselves and not being heard. The internet is a really beautiful place with so much raw emotion. It isn't just a bunch of losers that you can make fun of. It's not all idiocracy and Trump or just some hellish satirical wasteland. Come to think of it, a lot of the Jerma Dollhouse kinda reminds me of Inside. Oh god, we're about to talk about Inside, aren't we? Part 3. Inside. For those of you not in the loop, allow me to briefly contextualize the tangent we're about to go on. Bo Burnham's Inside is a Netflix special, let's call it, because I'm not sure comedy special really accurately encompasses the tone and structure of it, that was recorded solely by Burnham himself across many months in the guest house of his Los Angeles home. No crew, no audience, all in an effort to deliver something akin to his usual stand-up material, but in a format conducive to the global situation that we've been in since 2020. It obviously, like many of his other specials, involves songs and sketches about various topics and his life within these walls. But it also quickly becomes a very frank and often emotionally harrowing exploration of his own mental health, his relationship with his own audience, and the fog of performativity that surrounds it. This is, of course, filtered through Bo's usual sardonic and self-deprecating humor, which bounces between absurdist parodies like White Woman's Instagram and jokes that descend into uncomfortably personal reflections, like doing a reaction video to his own work, which transitions into a reaction video to the reaction video, silently lamenting the borderline nonsensical dedication we have to milking every aspect of our personal lives for some kind of content to repackage and send out into the world. I mean, God, he even has a segment where he parodies a streamer playing a game of himself crying in his room and trying to provide funny, relatable commentary over top it. All of this is nothing extremely out of character for him, of course. His prior specials have often tackled issues of self-image and social perspective as it pertains to having an audience, after all, and particularly because Bo himself blew up on YouTube when he was only a teenager. But there's something especially raw and almost extremely uncomfortable about the honesty with which he depicts how prone, frustrated, and worthless this can often make him feel. Uncomfortable, but also in a similarly twisted fashion, cathartic, because how encompassing can that feeling often be in light of what I've been trying to describe this whole time? The idea of someone trying as hard as they can to make even the most mundane personal details about themselves as highly appealing and theatrical as possible, for the sake of more exposure, more invasive entertainment at their own expense, all in an endless cycle of seeking something genuine, and in practice distancing ourselves from that further and further. And for what? To make a living? To entertain people? It quickly becomes so obvious why somebody in Bo's position, somebody who already had issues with these fears, abandoned comedy 5 years ago due to his severe onstage panic attacks. By the time he describes the process of his recovery reaching a height in January of 2020, when he starts to think he should return to live performance, it already dawns on us that deeply bitter and almost hilariously cruel outcome that's waiting for his past self on the other side of that decision. Because it's the one that led him to make what we've been watching for over an hour now by this point, which coincided with his mental health plummeting again in a way that I honestly don't think I've seen more chillingly depicted outside of literally watching myself in real time. It almost feels voyeuristic to see the way Bo acts during this, and that too seems almost to be part of the point, doesn't it? That something so human, something so tremendously discomforting and sad could itself be the crux behind a popular streaming film that has been nominated for multiple awards and whose soundtrack reached many national charts. Inside is in all ways a character study of isolation, depression, performance, and the parasocial, as it is an expertly edited, relatable piece of content that made a lot of people some pretty serious money. At the expense of Bo Burnham's own tangible, visible suffering, he also arguably benefited quite significantly from the visibility and monetary returns he saw from putting it on film in an artistically pleasing way that knew how to shake up an audience. There's something so beautiful and simultaneously deeply sad and troubling about the fact that we can all congregate around the feelings that this special provides while simultaneously consuming it the very terrifying, distantly hungry way that enabled its creator to make it in the first place. In a sense, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Gone too now is the novelty of content aware of its own parasocial obligations, to the point where comparisons can even be drawn from this and other things like it. Will this too become a format to be followed? It's only a matter of time, right? Like, I could get in front of the camera right now and just be emotionally open and break down and talk about all the things I fear in regards to content creation and the online sphere and all of that. But would it seem real? Would it seem approachable? Now that you're already thinking about it, even the most sincere admissions would all seem part of the theatricism, wouldn't it? God, that's scary. I don't even know what to propose in response to it. Is there a solution? Does it need a solution? I don't know the answers to that question, or if there even is a good one necessarily, but that still doesn't mean that I'll be able to stop thinking about it. The enclosed, tightly drawn spaces that Inside inhabits start as this seemingly endless venue for creativity, but they too become emblematic of the deeply isolative and claustrophobic spaces that we all find ourselves drawn into, waiting behind a curtain that's set to lift any time now, when we'll have to put on a smile, walk out and face the crowd, hoping to capture their attention, even if only but for a fleeting moment. At the very end of the special, Bo leaves his room only to find outside, on the side of the house, approaching the side lawn, is all a set, a soundstage, another crowded hall with spectators observing his actions. As he lingers coldly in that paralyzing spotlight, the audience begins to laugh, as he is locked out of his house and begins to desperately bang on the door, wanting to escape back into the comfortable silence of being unknown. Their laughter grows as he crumbles and sobs, and back in the room, another version of himself watches this footage displayed on a projector, smiling to himself. So ends another piece of relatable content. So, I hope you can kind of see what I was going for here, and why something that seems so harmlessly funny, which was and is very funny and deeply entertaining to me, also got me thinking about these things. Call it a stretch if you want, decry the springboarding if you wish. That's fine and might even be valid criticisms. But I feel that I'm at my most honest when I'm talking about the way I think, and what certain things lead me to think about, whether intentionally or otherwise. And I'd be lying if I said that the Jerma Dollhouse didn't captivate me in more ways than simply by virtue of surface-level entertainment value. Because it really did make for a hilarious companion piece to the anxieties I've been sitting with over the past year or so. But in that too, I find a little bit of hope. Seeing the way its massive crew and talented contributors came together to make it work, seeing the dedication Jeremy and everyone there put into it in order to make something memorable and fun for its audience, it reminds me of the inherent value to making media that sometimes gets lost in the weeds as more and more of these quandaries present themselves for our consideration. This doesn't mean that these questions aren't very real, apparent, and important, of course, but it also serves as a reminder that, at the end of the day, there's something this all exists for, aside from just making people money. It exists as a way for us to communicate and connect with each other, to share ideas, topics, or even just jokes. Art has always been an exchange, a conversation between the person painting the canvas and the person who comes along to see it. And it's things like this that remind me, even in my darkest moments, that's a huge part of why I bothered doing this in the first place. The vast expanse of media landscape that we inhabit can often be a terrifying, impersonal thing, but it can also be empowering, connective, and hopeful. We may not always know each other, but in some way, big or small, we can always try to help each other, whether through a laugh, through a conversation, or even a generous donation. There's always something to be gained from the ways that we express ourselves to the world around us, whether we're viewed by 2 people or 2 million people. And to be clear, yes, we should definitely take measures to ensure that we're not so tangled in parasocial webs that we overstep our boundaries and place undue pressure on people, but at the same time, we're incredibly blessed to have the opportunity to communicate ourselves so broadly for equally important reasons. The horror of being known is a paralyzing thing, but sometimes it's worth braving the cold. We just have to be careful about defining the lines that we've got to walk along the way. The line between our world and the dollhouse. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. I know this video was a little unconventional, and the media subject was more of a springboard for topic discussion than a more traditional analysis this time around. I hope that's chill with you. Sometimes I just get the demon in me to make something a little more abstract like this, because I just have to speak my mind about these things in a format I feel is right. If that's not your thing, that's cool, but thank you for watching and giving me the time of day regardless. As always, you can support the creation of my content on Patreon. Leaving a like and a comment helps tremendously to spread my content to more people as well. Subscribing is also obviously recommended if you'd like to see more of my content as it comes out. And ringing the bell is a good way to ensure that YouTube will actually notify you of it rather than just taking a nap when I upload something. Thank you all again sincerely for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace. Also, Jerma, if you're watching, you're looking pretty sus, bro.